Okay, so I think we'll kick things off now. So welcome everyone. Firstly, thank you so much for joining today's webinar. My name is Sally Phelps and I'm a Client Services Director here at in the Bristol office at Alterian. And this month, after having a break for a couple of months, we're back and we're continuing with the Hints and Tips theme. Today I'm really pleased to be joined by Thang. Thang's one of our senior solution architects at Alterian, and today he'll be running through how data privacy is an essential consideration for the adaptive marketeer. So just before I hand over to Thang, for those of you that haven't joined our webinars before, we will have some time at the end of the presentation for some questions and answers. So if you are logged in via your laptop or PC, you should find the Q&A section at the top side of the screen. And if you can't find that, then please do email myself at the email address customersuccess@alterian.com, as I'll be monitoring this during the presentation. And then secondly, we'll be recording today's session for you guys to refer back to. So please don't worry about making lots of notes, unless of course you'd like to. And we'll make sure the webinar recording is distributed at some point next week with the links via email and also Thang's presentation. And we'll make sure that they get put on the Alterian Academy as well. So with all of that said, I'll now hand over to Thang to begin the presentation today. So over to you, Thang.
Thanks, Sally. So today I'm going to talk about privacy impact assessments, PIAs. So PIAs are tools that can be used to reduce any sort of privacy risks. In our implementations of PIAs, it will take the form of a document. So the idea would be that for any new projects that come in, we will create the PIA, and then it will be maintained throughout the life of the relationship and the contracts. And it's very much confined to the Alterian solution. So it'll be things like how does data flow into Email Manager? How does it flow into Campaign Manager? Are there any API calls that are being made? And how does the data flow in and out? This is mandatory for all projects. And we've also started to create them retrospectively for all of our existing hosted clients. The PIA focuses on a couple of key areas. One of them being data flows. Consent is a big topic that we go through in the discussions and the workshops, and a couple of EU specific regulations around rights of access and right to be forgotten. We also look at the data model security and look at any sensitive data that you may have in the system. All of that then is summarized in a risk section, and what we do then is try to manage the risks through the project and through our term, our life of our relationship with you as well. The risks are really important, and anything that's highlighted in projects could become then an implementation task. So that's why we run it within the requirements phases. We also try to set deadlines for each of the risks, so they can be managed and thought through. So why have we started to do PIA? So really, it's centered around some EU regulation that's coming to force in May. GDPR actually applies to any company that hosts EU citizen data. So you may be in the US or Australia, and you may think it's not relevant, but it will be if there's any sort of UK, European data that resides in any of your systems in the US. It also contains a lot of good working practices. In the UK, we have lots of data privacy legislation that's already in place, and GDPR looks to strengthen those processes, those legislations, those laws, and actually makes it more of a forward thought now that privacy should be part of the mindset of all marketeers. GDPR has a very stringent practices and regulations, so we're actually holding that as our sort of our highest standard that we can follow. And for anyone who's worrying about Brexit, post-Brexit, the GDPR will still be valid, as it'll be enshrined in UK law. Okay. So the first section within the PIA is around data flows. So here's an example. We've got a big chunk in the middle, which is our AWS infrastructure and email manager. It shows you how data flows around internally in our system. And then to the left and the right, we would include anything to do with your source systems. You may have a data processor, agency that creates certain things, and that will also go in here as well. And we can see where it fits in the process. So are they supplying additional data sets, or do you supply the data to them and then they supply the data to us? And on the right hand side, it's normally to do anything with outputs. So are these FTP sites? Are these print houses? Are they online channels? So you can quickly see from the diagram where data flows around within Campaign Manager and where it flows out as well. Based on that, then we can sort of assess any risks in terms of cross-border storage. So our AWS is stored in a regional data center. So in the US, there's 3 or 4 different regions that you can store data in. The UK, there's 2. APAC, there's 1. So we're just making sure that even though your AWS implementation is stored within, say, US data center, you may be extracting data out to a European data center, in which case we'll drill into that a little bit further just to see what the requirements are and whether there's any sort of data flow issues around that. The next big part of what we look at is consent. So this is a big thing now in Europe. There's GDPR, which will come in, which I mentioned before, which will basically supersede any other privacy legislation across Europe. US has obviously the CAN Spam, and Australia has the Spam Act. CAN Spam is mainly to do with emails, and each individual state law will have its own privacy laws as well. So really, it's trying to find the common ground between these. And when we look at all these laws, individual state laws as well, the US in particular, the Californian state law is very stringent on privacy. So if you were to implement a privacy policy across the US data sets, you would probably implement the California one just in case you ever get any California customers. Now, if you look at these and the GDPR in the US and the Australian Spam Act, they actually are on par with each other in terms of privacy. Obviously, there's certain nuances in each, but the underlying themes are exactly the same. So as long as we follow GDPR across the board, then you're most likely going to cover all of these state and regional laws as well. So consent now is changing in a way that there are no more pre-tick boxes. Opt-ins can't be assumed through a lack of response. The boxes have to be unticked, and I should make a conscious effort into making a declaration of opt-in. The next thing is that it must be easily withdrawn. So this is already common practice in a lot of places. So you may have preference pages or data capture forms, or even something as simple as the unsubscribe link at the bottom of the email. Well, as long as it's not a laborious task for me to take my consent away, I don't need to write into to your data privacy officer and have that go through a cycle of approval before it goes. It must be pretty much immediate. One of the big things, which is going to catch a lot of people out, is that consent should be unbundled from terms and conditions, because what we need to distinguish is, what am I signing up for? Am I signing up for a service? In which case, should that service preclude me from any marketing activities, or naturally include me for marketing activities? So this is where a lot of marketing companies have sort of got away with putting in implicit opt-ins in their T's and C's, but that should now be changed. And what we're seeing now is a move towards privacy policies, where it's a different section of the web page that will give you information about a data privacy officer, who to contact if your information is incorrect, who to contact if you want to know how your data is processed. And that's coming more and more now. I think it's heavily adopted in the US, and it's coming more into the European markets now as well. One of the big things that we need to look at is documenting the changes. And I think that if you just have a flag to say they were opted in, it's very difficult to backtrack and look at any complaints. So, if I got sent an email 4 times this week, but I opted out in that process, which email should I have not had? And that's very difficult to work out if there isn't a history. The last one as well was a big thing, and that bundles in with the T's and C's. So you shouldn't withdraw service if consent isn't given. So a good example of that is if you were trying to capture marketing details at the till, when I pay for my goods, that's the time to pass the information. It shouldn't form part of the checkout process, because that implies then that I can't buy my goods without giving you an email address. So that's standard practice across the board in a lot of places. But I do know some of the shops that I've purchased in before, they do ask for an email address, which you're not really told you can refuse. It's not given out that way. So there's a number of functions and features within our product set that will help you. So within the email manager, we can create preference pages, we can create GDC forms. There are various permutations of how a list and a field on a list can be set up to see whether it's opt-in or opt-outable. We also have the automatic unsubscribe links on all emails. That can also be customized to take you to a GDC form that you host on your own website as well, that links to your CRM system. So they're all standard functions that are available now. A change that's coming in a couple of weeks is that if you store a GDC form or have a preference page with an email manager, we will record the history of changes. That's stored in the background, so your system won't be clogged up with the history. But obviously, if you needed to get to the history, then we can make that available to you for a request from the service desk. Within Campaign Manager and Email Manager, we already have the options to create audiences and smart lists filtered on preferences or any other demographic information. A new thing, again, which is coming in a couple of weeks, is the ability to assign preferences to creative. So this is a new thing within Email Manager, and obviously Campaign Manager will respect the same setup. So the idea now is that I could have preferences set up on a GDC form, such as newsletter, pets, DIY, holidays. And then what I can do then is within the creative itself, I can assign preferences to the creative. So this creative is a newsletter, which also has DIY elements in there as well. Now, if anyone knows me, I hate DIY, so I would never opt into the DIY preference. And I'm not keen on newsletters either. So I've opted into neither in terms of my preferences within Email Manager. We run a campaign. Selected in the audience criteria. And when the email is sent, because the Email Manager knows that I have not opted into either of those preferences, it will suppress me. It will never go out the door. There'll be a new event that gets raised that will be loaded into our response history table that will track that. So at least you can see that 100 recipients were sent to Email Manager, 10 of which were preference suppressed, and 90 went out the door. So you can tally all of your ROI figures together. Let's say that's a new feature coming. We're running a session later on in a couple of weeks to describe the things in more detail. I recommend that you sign up to that. It's a really good feature. I'll quickly skim through these 2 slides because they're EU specific. But if any of you host EU data, right of access is a big thing. So you must be able to have a process that will allow your customers to request all the information that's held about them, and obviously how it's processed, and it decodes and returned in a readable format, such as a text file or a printout. Where we can help you with this is we do have a standard process for our hosted clients. If they submit a request to the service desk, we can get the campaign information and the email manager information out of the system fairly quickly and get that back to you as well. Just to bear in mind that we are the data processors, not the controllers. So you would be the data controller. So there's certain obligations in a SARS request where you need to verify the identity of the person before proceeding with the request. So that's something simple like a passport scan or a driver's license scan that is sent in. You then raise a request to us, and then we'll process all the data and turn it back to you via a secure channel. Right to be forgotten is a really biggie one in the EU at the moment. We've had a couple of landmark cases against Google around how you can delete my information off the internet. Ours is slightly different in terms of the Alterian approach. So it's all around a couple of options. We have about 3 or 4 options that we can implement within the data model. It could be as hard as physically deleting that record from all of the tables and all the transactions, campaign history, email manager. There's no trace of them. Or it could be a slightly softer approach where we're going to anonymize the data. So at least the IDs, the customer IDs, are still retained. So from a reporting an ROI perspective, your figures will still tally. You're not losing figures because someone's asked to be removed from the system. There are some exceptions to this, and it's where there's a legal compliance issue where we have to retain the data. So if you think about unsubscribes, it'd be very difficult to maintain an unsubscribe list if you don't have the email address. So in those instances, we would have to retain the email address to keep on fulfilling the unsubscribe request. Similar thing, we have a standard process with the Alterian help desk. You just raise a request, and we'll go through the options, and we can implement whichever one suits your needs. Different clients will have different solutions for what they want in terms of right to be forgotten. The next thing is all around privacy by design. This is a big thing that we're looking at the moment. It's how do we think about making sure the system is secure and private in the first place, rather than trying to retrospectively apply things. So this is a big initiative within the development teams at the moment. So there'll be changes coming in the products that will have privacy in mind. But what we have at the moment, we have standard functionality that we can use. I don't know whether any of you have used the table or row level security. So table level security means that we can hide a table away from certain users, and row level security means that we can actually hide rows of data away from certain users. Again, it's an assessment of what level of granularity each person needs to see. So in this example here, you can see that what we've done is we've moved the PIA, the personal identifiable information, away from another table. So as an analyst, I never need to see the first name, last name, email address. I just care about the customer's attributes. But as a campaign user, I need to know all of the personal information so that I can use it within campaigns to tailor and personalize messages. So we can do a really simple thing by moving all that data away and then securing the personal attributes table to only the campaign users. There's a couple of other things that we can implement. There's role-based access, and there's folder and document restrictions as well within Campaign Manager. So when you log in, you can only see the tools and only see the folders that you're allowed to see. Again, if you're looking at from a campaign and a campaign and an analytics user, the analytics user never needs to see the campaigns, and then it never needs to have the tools that support campaigns as well. Plus, we can hide or restrict the use of the import and export tool as well. So there's a couple of things there that's straight out of the box now that we can implement. We also look at sensitive data. So this will be a case of going through the data specs, the data samples that we normally request during projects and change controls. And we'll look through to see whether the sensitive data is needed, what type of sensitive data it is, how it's been used, and how it be secured. And we'll really challenge you there as to whether it actually needs to be stored. You know, something like facial recognition data, is that really needed for marketing activities? If not, we will drop that information out. If we want to keep it in, then it's how do we make sure that that information is secured in transfer, how it gets to us, how we store it, and then how it's also moved out of the system as well. And that's really important, you know, when we look at the whole end-to-end flow, which is why the data flow diagram is important there. And then the final thing, we'll create a risk matrix that we'll work through. So this will go through all of the sections that we've discussed, the interviews that we would have had, and then we'll make a list of all the things that we deem to be risks in terms of privacy. Some of them can be accepted, like this first one here, where it's good practice to adopt a double opt-in confirmation process. It might well be that it's not needed for your marketing activities, in which case we accept the risk that it's not going to be implemented, but it's there as a marker that we have reviewed and put that recommendation forward as well. And then we just go through all of the other, the consents, all the sections to see what we can find. The important thing here now is the PIA should be used and reviewed on a regular basis. So any sort of any new changes that come through, the PIA will always be referenced to see whether there's anything that needs to be changed. We're expecting 98% of the time it's just a tick box. We've reviewed it, no change. But there will be other times where possibly new data sets that come in will have sensitive data that we need to assess. This is a working document, so again, it should be reviewed throughout the for regular contact points for QBRs or sort of service reviews, and making sure that the target dates are kept up to date with everything. Okay. Yeah.
Oh, great. Well, thanks for all that information, Thang. Really interesting. Quite a lot to get through, so thanks for that. Just checking to see if we've had any questions sent through. And I'll just give the guys maybe a moment or so just in case there are any. But in the meantime, thank you very much for joining us today. There's been some surveys that we've been sending out just to make sure that you guys have a mechanism to feedback to tell us what else you'd like to see from the webinar programme and the Alterian Academy. So please, if you haven't had a copy of those, let your customer success manager, partner service manager know. Please, provide feedback to myself directly. Feel free to do that at customersuccess@alterian.com. And we'll make sure all of this content is made available to you next week on the Alterian Academy and sent out to you via emails as well. So again, no direct questions for you today, Thang. You're off the hook. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today, and hopefully see you guys again next month. Thanks again. Cheers. Bye-bye.